Recording two, three, two, one.
Hi, welcome to Skills for Mom. Happy to start today's story. I'm going to be Ryan today.
And my name is Joe. I'm related to be behind the scenes and set her up to tell the story. I can assure you that Grace is a woman of perseverance. There's definitely been a road of how she's been proving her beliefs through challenges, some big things that she's done. And then a little bit about the road of how we're bringing her ideas to life. So first, let's go back to maybe some early memories. I don't know if you want to talk about some of your earliest memories, or maybe then get into like how you found out what you were good at, specifically running.
Sure. So I'm the oldest of three siblings. I have a sister 2 years younger than me, and my brother is 6 years younger than me. So when he was born, I was kind of like second mom to him. And so I always loved helping take care of kids. I always enjoyed sports a lot. Back when I was a kid, select and all these like super hyper intense sports weren't a thing, but I did YMCA soccer and I did basketball for a year. I, even though I enjoyed sports and that was definitely my thing versus like choir and theater, I wasn't like the girl scoring. I'm pretty sure I never scored a soccer goal in a game. Like I was a great halfback. I could run a lot, but then, I'd pass it to my teammate and then they would score the goal. And so I think in that I didn't always feel, and hand-eye coordination probably was not my strong suit. I was not a gymnast. I finally got the cartwheel down, I think in 8th grade, but I guess we were training for the physical fitness test. So you have to do a mile in a certain time. This is back 5th, 6th grade. And I ended up with my friend, Kenny Turner. We were running the mile together for like a track meet and ended up tying for first place. This was in 6th grade, 7:18, which, back then that was a fast mile. Doesn't sound too fast now, but yeah, so that was kind of my like, wow, I'm really good at something. And so from there, I went on in 7th and 8th grade to run cross country and would place. I never got first place, but I would place at pretty much every meet and it was like, this is my thing. I might not be able to sprint and beat someone, but I can keep running and I will beat them, especially up on the hills. That was my thing. I never slowed down on the hills. Maybe at the top or going downhill I would, but I always kept the exact same pace going up hills, which is hard for people. So I continued that on into high school, even going to a public school, and was still able to run varsity cross country on a 5A team. Again, I was not Division I college, get a scholarship for sports, but I did well in that. And then anytime I would do a race in college and beyond, sometimes I'd get first in my age group. I was just determined whether it was a half marathon or a 5K. I did do a half Ironman at one point to raise money for chicken farms in Uganda. That's a whole another story. In that long, arduous race, that would have been back in 13. So it's been a minute, but it was like I determined to do that. I'd never done a triathlon, and sure enough, I did that half Ironman, and I think got first in it in my age group, and have done one triathlon since then, just a sprint one, and I really enjoyed that as well. So running has definitely been an outlet for me and kind of continues to be in my journey, as now in this season, after having my 5th kid, I'm having to take a step back from running and more kind of like pelvic floor strengthening before I'm just jumping right back into that. So that's been something I care about helping other women with, because I know it's a real thing, wanting to get back in shape after having kids and then not knowing how to do that safely and in a good way. And also growing up, I loved my science classes. I've already shared kind of in my first episode about how I went on the journey to become a nurse, then worked in ER, went back to PA school, and then now I'm using my PA knowledge as a mother and then to help other moms. I mean, even back to 3rd grade, we got to dissect like pigs' hearts and cows' eyes and blow up cows' lungs with a big tube. And I mean, I loved all that stuff. Most of the other 3rd grade girls were like all squeamish and saying how gross everything was, but I was just so into it, like all the anatomy. I think even in college, I mean, biology was okay, but like once we got to the like, you're actually dissecting stuff and you're actually like seeing how it fits in the human body, that felt just more relatable than just like, oh, this is a chlorophyll or, Golgi body, things like that. Um, so it's, I guess, been hardwired in me that I've always wanted to be in medicine. And then in high school, did an internship in the neonatal intensive care unit for one of the big hospitals in Dallas, and then continued to get to work just taking care of little preemies in college. But, part of that experience was sometimes it was being at a bedside open heart surgery. Sometimes it was helping carry a little baby who didn't make it down to the morgue. I mean, it was intense as a 17-year-old, but it didn't deter me from like wanting to go that direction to help people and be involved in like life and death situations. So.
As you continue to kind of pursue your dreams, obviously you went to college. Can you talk a little bit about what your first year of college was like?
Yeah, so I went to a big SEC school. So the Greek life was a huge thing. And I was a triple legacy for one particular sorority and was planning to go Greek, doing the rush stuff, sorority recruitment. And for whatever reason, some reason or another, maybe I didn't know the right people, but I ended up not placing into one of the houses first year. And it was
into any houses.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right.
Yeah, like some of the houses I'd cut them, and then, and then of the houses left, I ended up, dropping out of rush. And I lived in the all girls sorority dorm. All of my friends were in sororities. That's what I thought was going to be my like thing I did. And so that was just devastating as a freshman. And so, so many days of the week, girls' lives revolved around going to their, sorority meetings and going to their sorority philanthropies and their, all the things you do. And so there was this void, and so I ended up joining K Life, which is kind of like Young Life, and, mentoring basically junior high kids. So one girl, I just was texting her this week. We are still in touch. She was in my wedding, but at the time she was a 12-year-old kid alone, at a lunch table. And I just went up to her and started a relationship with her. And through that time, she really grew in her faith and started to be the one. She went from kind of like being isolated, not having friends, to now she was the one who was reaching other people. And now she's now gotten a master's degree in art and is doing basically like missions type things in urban cities. And so, it's just crazy to see how, here my heartache and trying to choose something positive really has impacted people I didn't think would still be impacted to this day. But it was still a hard thing. And then I ended up working 4 summers of college at a camp in Africa, which was an amazing experience, but also, very taxing physically, and also just the stories. There would be kids while we were at camp, that would die of HIV or some preventable illness that they contracted, just because they were so malnourished. And so one girl in particular named Febby, who I did the triathlon for, Try for Febby, was, died a couple weeks before I got to camp. And I was just devastated that this little girl I had known since 2007 died 4 years later. And, I just didn't even feel like I could really mourn, or, there was so much going on. And so, years later, decided to kind of pursue doing an initiative to help other kids like her through building chicken farms in Uganda, and used doing a half Ironman as kind of the vehicle to do that. But, I ended up going back and doing Rush my second year of college. I felt led to go through that again. And through some people I had met at Pine Cove, a summer camp in Tyler that I had worked at, as well as Zambia, I stayed busy doing, camps and mission trip type things. 2 of those girls just really saw my heart and ended up, wanting me to be part of their organization. And so here I ended up going back through Rush and then getting to Rush the house that my mom and grandma and great grandma were in, Kappa, and, was able to forgive, kind of like the Joseph story in the Bible of just, hey, it's okay about what happened last year and all that heartache I went through of being lonely so many nights. And I was saying, I forgive you, and to be able to join this thing I really wanted, So it was both a great experience, but I also kind of realized on the other side, like the grass isn't always greener. And some of my best friends throughout college weren't actually in Greek life. They were through nursing school, maybe church or something like that. And so I still thank God, redeemed beauty for ashes, that I was able to go through that rejection and then forgive those people, be accepted back in the organization that I so wanted, and then realize it wasn't where life was at, and then as a senior in college, I ended up being a rush counselor called a Gamma Chi. And so I was able to lead freshmen who are going through that same process. And many of the girls in my group, they didn't get either any house or the house they wanted, and they were going through rejection and all of those feelings again. And to be able to be vulnerable with them, hey guys, I literally know what it's like that happened to me, and you're going to see it on the other side. And I kept in touch with many of those girls for several years and, saw their maturation, even if they didn't go Greek, that they were able to find where they did belong on campus. And so that really was a big part of my story, even though, now looking back, would I tell my kids to all do Greek life? I don't know. But, I think there was some good that came from that for sure.
For sure. And a lot of girls, if they get cut from the house, they will just completely, from in the rushing process, they'll just, if they can't join a sorority, they'll just completely leave, right?
Yeah, I mean, Arkansas was such a Greek strong school that there would be kids, if they didn't get the house that they wanted, I mean, they would drop out of college, to go to a different college or maybe rush the next semester somewhere else. I mean, that was it for them, and yeah, I knew that wasn't what I was going to do, but there was still a lot of like lonely nights and times where I, probably chose kind of cowering down versus finding a better, thing to do than staying in my dorm room and watching a TV show, but I moved past that, and then had things like Camp Life in Zambia or K Life, in ways that it's like once I got outside of myself and was helping other people, I think that was probably the most helpful thing to kind of get me out of my funk. And then once I got out of that place, to then realize that's not necessarily where life was. Like I said, I ended up finding a lot more life through other programs on campus, not just Greek life.
So then as you're starting to graduate from college and then after school, talk about what that was like, going from college to working in a small town ER in Arkansas, maybe some of the challenges there.
Yeah, so I had really gotten connected in a church in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and was part of their youth group, like helping be a youth leader. And so I would say a lot of my friends were starting to get married. And even though I really desired that, it just hadn't lined up for me, and it was like, okay, well, I felt like God was calling me to stay where I was at, still be connected with my family in Dallas, but to be planted in Arkansas. And so I worked in ER there for, I guess it would have been a year and a half total before I moved to Dallas, and learned so much. I mean, did night shift. I had a great charge nurse who would intentionally put me, here as a new nurse, with the things that really were scary, harder for me, like a trauma patient, or, you have codes, which means someone comes in basically dead on arrival and you're having to do the CPR and run all the meds to try to resuscitate them. And, a lot of times they don't have that. But through that experience, really growing in my confidence, and then some things that at a time were challenging, like for a while I kept missing IVs and feeling not confident. But then, that again, that charge nurse being like, you're going to get back in there. We're going to figure out what your challenge is and help you do it the right way. And getting to a point where I became so confident with nurses, I was able to do them in people's necks, like invert them, and, which in a lot of hospitals only like anesthesiologists are allowed to do. And so once I developed that competency, I was really proud that like, wow, obviously you don't want an IV in a neck if you can avoid it, but it's like, hey, if someone really needs an IV, I can put it in, and so, or little babies, these teeny little veins, like right on their head or on a little teeny hand, and so that was a skill that I struggled with for a little while, but then was able to grow in competence. Um, and then during that time was when my husband Joseph and we started dating. We had known each other for a while, but he pursued me and was even willing to like move to a different state to help me pursue my dream to go to medical school. Um,
Obviously, you guys know I made a good choice, the best choice. But what was that like for you? I mean, were you kind of always going on dates with guys in college and high school, or what was that story like for you?
yeah, so I mean, if you haven't gotten the sense, I was quite the overachiever. If you could get like an A on something, I was getting the A plus. I would like do whatever you needed to get the top grade possible. So there were not a lot of guys in the scene, which now I have gratitude that I didn't have the heartache and some situations that I, had friends face. But that was challenging too, to go through pretty much all high school and college with no one asking me on dates, not going to dances. I would go sometimes to the Sadie Hawkins. I would invite, a guy that was friends from church or something, or, occasionally we'd do like group things, So I tried to get out there and I tried to have fun and hang out with my friends who were girls. But yeah, that was hard to feel like I was the only one who wasn't dating around. Then when I met my husband, he really hadn't been this huge on the dating scene either. And so it kind of
I was waiting for the right one.
So it kind of lined up that it's like, okay, I'm glad I didn't waste my kisses on the wrong boys.
That's for sure. We were each other's first everything. And so glad that we waited for each other. Okay, so definitely there were times of testing. However, obviously being in a sorority, and I know you've told me stories about, you could have made different choices, but what kept you focused on waiting on your values?
I think just the seeing where you're going, and having something worth waiting for. Interesting as this is, a couple years before Joseph and I started dating, I really felt like I was supposed to study who Joseph was in the Bible, the character of Joseph. And I'd written on my little future husband checklist, it was like a man like Joseph with that kind of integrity. I didn't think my actual husband's going to be named Joseph. But I really started meditating on, I want to be someone like Joseph in the Bible, who has this total forgiveness here. He's been wronged in so many ways, and yet that doesn't stop him from, the plans God has for him. And then he is promoted to a position of authority multiple times, but he doesn't let that position of power kind of taint him, where he doesn't give in to Potiphar's wife or, some certain things that he could have totally compromised on. And then I feel like the stage I'm at in some ways right now with Joseph, he had two sons that we know of, Ephraim and Manasseh, who we get the sense in the Bible that they were the sons of unity because, most of Jacob's other sons, there was so much tension and, discord. And Jewish people still to this day, when they bless their sons on Friday night for Shabbat, they say, like, may you be like Ephraim and Manasseh, two honorable patriarchs from the Torah. And we have 5 boys, and we tell them that frequently. We want, our number one thing for you is we want y'all to be brothers in unity. And I think that started from who Joseph was with, forgiveness and not compromising. And so those things that he did early on in his life, kind of like for me, maybe that was choosing not to, go to, sleazy dances, or not to go to the frat houses where there's all this drinking, or whatever it is, not trying to point fingers, but those small choices then pave the road for like where I'm at today and where our kids are able to be at. And, and then here Joseph's sons got kind of like a double inheritance where there should have been 11 tribes of Jacob or Israel, but then Joseph was divided into 2. So it became the 12 tribes, and so I feel like there's a lot in Genesis to learn from that, story. So I think that can kind of highlight where I was and where I want to keep going.
Yeah, waiting for the right opportunities. Obviously, we waited till marriage to do married people things, and we can edit this out if that's too much information. But yeah, having a vision and a trust that God's way is better, and that's how we want to raise our kids too. Okay, so you talked a little bit about choosing to go back to medical school. Did your friends kind of understand you? Were there guys that were like, "Oh yeah, this will be great. I want my wife to be a doctor someday," or what was that? How was that overcome? Obviously, I'm setting you up. What did you have to overcome there?
Yeah, so I think, growing up in a Christian subculture where, which again, really, here I am a stay-at-home mom right now, so I'm not hating on stay-at-home moms, but there can be some Christian culture of like, this is the only right way to live and to be. And so I think I felt a lot of guilt that like a woman shouldn't be a doctor, or a woman can't do that, and I wouldn't, it was all these unspoken things, I wouldn't have, maybe I'm not smart enough, and I finally got to a place where a mentor and the youth group leader at the time, was like, Grace, you need to stop saying, I think I'm going to go to medical school. I think I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a doctor. Like, just say what it is, and then if that changes for some reason, I'm going to be a PA, just like, state what's going on in your life. You don't have to be ashamed of that. And so Joseph was definitely a guy I knew who, he had heard through the grapevine or whatever, oh, I think Grace is going to medical school now. That wasn't like a crazy thing to him, and when we got to know each other and we're dating, he knew my heart, that I wanted to have a big family, to have kids, but also pursue medicine. And I didn't know how it was going to work, but I was just taking the next step. And, he really supported that, that we didn't have to know why. We just needed to walk out in obedience. I still don't know completely, why did I go to all of that school, learn all that stuff, graduate top of my class twice, to now be, homeschooling at home. It can feel anticlimactic in some ways. But then what if I was working full time at a big corporation, would I feel more fulfilled? I don't know. I tried that before, and it's a grind to do that, especially with young ones at home that get sick and things happen. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, and obviously, yeah, you were willing to focus on who you felt like God called you to be, despite the challenges and the fact that our systems, our hospitals, and our culture is not really set up to let moms be professionals and moms. Very good systems. And maybe that leads into the next question about, how you experienced that firsthand, that it was hard to be both a mom and a PA. So do you want to talk at all about different challenges during pregnancy and some of the things you've overcome?
Yeah. I've had all of my babies with midwives. I've just loved the model. I feel like it's empowering to women. Like, weigh yourself. You do your own swab. You don't have to be weighed by someone, or, they talk about, instead of someone delivering your baby, you're birthing your baby and they're like there to catch the baby. Just those small differences, I think, and having that relationship driven care, which I think keeps stress levels down. And when mom's stress levels down, then delivery and things like that can go better. But even when you do all the right preparation, birth is an adventure. And I think each child's birth in a way kind of reflects who they are as a person, but and kind of maybe odds that they're coming up against. So yeah, with my first son, born naturally at a birth center right by a hospital with a nurse midwife. And so again, it's like, birth is not for the faint of heart. And, there's scars, I guess, left on our bodies and our hearts from that process, even if we do it naturally and try to have it as, aligned with God as possible, that it's still a challenging thing. And with my second son, we decided to have him in the hospital with a midwife, just to have kind of the extra hospital backing. And for my third and fourth birth was really just able to have these redemptive births at a birth center without any issues, no tearing, and was really just, a gift from God in a time. It was still kind of the COVID time when so many people were forced to wear masks when pregnant. No one could be in the hospital with them. And so we really wanted to do things differently, where we had some of our closest friends, female friends at the birth with me. And then for my fourth son being born, my oldest son was able to be there as well. And then we were able to have our last baby here, where we now live with a midwife, and we had a home birth. It was a harder birth for me.
Love you, Grace. So thankful for how you've laid down your life for our children, and you love them so much. I hope they someday realize that, how much you've put on the line for them. And I just love how you're such a hero. You're an amazing picture of God's love. So thanks for sharing that. So I feel like throughout that process, you also have remained unwaveringly committed to honoring God's design for your body, right? So I just want to talk about how you've chosen to continue to believe in something even when it's hard.
I think there's a lot of hard decisions now we have to make as moms, like when do you give your kid a phone, and how many shows do you let them watch, and what are the rules for iPads, or, how do you bring a baby in the world? And a lot of times a decision that's hard, like not having the iPad or waiting a long time for a phone, that makes your life more challenging, and it could end up being more enriching. Or having to walk somewhere, that takes a lot longer than driving in your car. And so these small things that, again, they may seem insignificant at the time, but they really add up to a different life, and I definitely don't want to, there's reasons to have a more medical birth, whether it's with an epidural or C-section, so our heart is not to hate on people that needs to be what they need. I'm a big believer that there's a right time to have medical, but we got to be willing to ask questions, even with a couple of my children, whether needing a surgery or a broken bone. A lot of times what different medical institutions were offering is like, okay, we're going to give this, and this drug, they only needed one of those, or, they were saying, oh, you have to sedate the child to put an IV in. And I said, I think they'll be okay. Let's just try the show. And sure enough, or same thing, just getting a filling, like, oh yeah, you have to do sedation to get a filling. I was like, I'm pretty sure they'll be okay. But again, if you don't use shows as your default, then watching that Jungle Book for the first time ever, it's going to be really entrancing for a kid who's hardly seen cartoons. But I think we can always make those small shifts, like we're realizing some of our kids eat way too soft of foods, and we do more process than needed. And so that's a shift we're working on, is how can we get more raw veggies and more nuts and more things that you really have to chomp on in their diets. And that there's some push, when you first make those changes, it doesn't come easy. So there's definitely grace, pardon the pun, for like wherever you're at in the journey, and each situation being so different. If we didn't have family help or babysitter help, I probably would need to be more reliant on shows at some points to do what I'm doing right now. And so every person's situation is so different. But it is those small choices, I think, that can add up to a radically different next step, I guess.
For sure. And we're learning, as we go. So it could be in a year or two, we come back and we revise some things here, because as I said, we're testing this out, and we want to kind of learn in the light, um, and hope that what we share here is helpful to others as well. Great. Well, I think that is a great place to wrap it up today. Obviously, you guys can see the perseverance of my beautiful bride and how she's continuing to run literally, and want to run and want to keep doing the things that God's created her to do. Do you want to just set the stage for part C?
Sure. Yeah. So in the next episode, we just want to kind of give you the overarching vision of like why Skills for Mom. There's so many podcasts, there's so many websites and blogs out there, which again, I see that and I've questioned that myself, but I feel like I have a unique skill set and a unique background that I really want to bring information, and not just information, but wisdom, true wisdom to moms to empower them to live differently, and just make those minor tweaks that could, when you think of trajectory, make a big shift down the road. So thanks for your time, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, that's it. Tools for Motherhood Living.